Hello and welcome to the WTA Weekly Wrap-Up. My name is Jess, and over here on the Quality Shot YouTube channel, we talk about everything that's going on the women's side of the tennis tour. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you love tennis, because Quality Shot covers everything both on the men's and women's side of the tennis tours. And this week, we're going to focus on the Iga Swiatek news because that definitely dominated the headlines this week. I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown of how everything went down because I did read the court documents, so you guys don't have to. So Iga did test positive for a banned substance called trimodazidine. We're going to call it TMZ for short. It's a metabolic modulator which is able to have performance enhancing benefits, and this dates back to the 12th of August of this year, just before the Cincinnati Open, which is when Iga was tested for the product. And from that test, it did show that Iga had TMZ in her system. A month after the initial test, on the 14th of September, the International Tennis Integrity Agency, the ITIA, issued Iga with a pre-charge notice, basically stating that she had breached the anti-doping rules. That meant from that date, she was subject to a provisional mandatory suspension, and in an attempt to overturn her initial suspension, she did argue that she didn't knowingly or deliberately have TMZ in her system, and that if it was in her system, it would have been done either through contamination or inadvertently occurred. From the evidence that she provided, she wasn't able to overturn her initial suspension, and as is her right, she commissioned some experts to look into where the TMZ had come from and why it was in her system, and it was determined by the experts that the contamination of TMZ was actually in a melatonin product that she had been using. She had been using the melatonin to help with her sleep and jet lag, and the particular product she was using was very common and available for purchase in pharmacies in Poland. The melatonin she'd been using had then been verified and checked in another lab, which looked into whether the product was in fact contaminated. So they tested the product she was using, the actual bottle, the opened one, and then also used an unopened one, but in the same batch to see. And it was found that both of them did in fact have TMZ contamination in them. So the results from the lab meant that the ITIA was satisfied to lift her suspension, and that happened on the 4th of October. And although that provisional suspension was lifted because they were able to determine that there was a contamination because she still had the product in her system, she was still issued with a formal breach notice. Because although there was a contamination, there is still a level of responsibility on Iga and her team to make sure that the products that she's using are not contaminated. Iga did accept that there had been a breach that had occurred, and that meant the ITIA had to determine what the appropriate punishment was going to be for her. Now I'm going to try and break down as easily as possible how the system sort of works and kind of compare this to the situations with both Jannik and also Simona Halep. Now how the ITIA works, because there was a prohibited substance found in her system, Iga was initially given a 4-year suspension. However, because it was determined that the use of the TMZ product was not intentional, that meant that her 4-year suspension was lowered to 2 years. Then the ITIA asked the question of, well, can the suspension be reduced any further? And in this case, and similar to the Sinner case, the ITIA determined that yes, it could be reduced on the no fault or negligence argument. Now I'm going to read to you what that means, what that argument is, and it basically is that the player must not know or suspect and could not reasonably have known or suspected, even with the exercise of utmost caution, that they have used or been administered the prohibited substance. Basically saying, did they do everything in their power to prevent the contamination or the banned substance getting into their system? In the Jannik Sinner situation, he was able to fully prove that he did do his best to prevent it. I mean, if you remember that case, what happened there was that his physio was using a product for himself that then went into Sinner. So Sinner was never actually using the product himself. So I think that's a key difference here, is that there was like a degree of separation between Sinner and his physio, because Sinner didn't actually know what his physio was using. Now in the Iga case, the product was being used by her. She was taking the melatonin, which meant that the connection was a little closer. There wasn't that extra step. It wasn't like someone else was taking the melatonin. Iga was taking it, and that meant that she did have a degree of personal responsibility on what she was using. And that's why Sinner was able to have his ban basically fully overturned, and he didn't have to be suspended for a month like Iga, because he was able to prove no fault or negligence basically in its entirety. Whereas Iga, on the other hand, couldn't, and that meant that she was suspended for a month. And because in the months prior she had already been suspended and wasn't able to compete in a few events, which tied into the final decision. In the Simona Halep case, although there was a contamination found, in the early stages, she wasn't able to demonstrate where that contamination came from. Unlike Iga, who once she had the experts, it was determined pretty quickly that it was the melatonin, whereas in the case of Halep, it wasn't. So unlike Iga, Halep couldn't prove where the product was, and there was also higher dosages as well when it came to usage. So the two cases are similar, but definitely not the same. Now, there are a lot of other questions that can be asked about the Halep situation, but if we just focus on the basic similarities, then the two cases are quite different. Although there is probably an argument that can be made that there were ways that the Halep situation could have been dealt with better, but the three situations, the Sinner, Halep, and Iga situations, are all a little bit different. And also with the Halep situation, it went further. So she wasn't able to prove no fault or negligence, and they also couldn't prove that it wasn't an intentional use. So in that first instance where I was saying that you were initially suspended for 4 years, the ITIA couldn't rule that it wasn't intentional, which meant that her suspension wasn't lowered. Now, if we get back to the Iga situation, whether 1 month suspension is appropriate or not, I guess that is up for debate whether you agree with that. Overall, to a point, she was able to prove that she had no fault or negligence, but not entirely, and that's why she still got a suspension. I hope that makes sense because there is a lot of legal moving parts to it, but hopefully that at least clears up the situation a little bit. So in the end, that means that Iga is suspended for 1 month. However, she will be back just in time for the start of the 2025 season. So it's going to be really interesting to see how she bounces back from this. I think the fact that she starts at the United Cup is probably good because she's going to be in a team environment with her catch and all the other Polish players. So that will probably help her ease back into the tennis season. So we will have to wait and see, but the tennis season is not far away. We've only got a couple of weeks before the United Cup kicks off on the 27th of December. So get excited because the 2025 season is so close. And look, that's everything I have for this week's video. I hope that was a little bit helpful in understanding the Iga situation and understanding why it's a little bit different to some of the other cases that have gone on this year. Look, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button to Quality Shot. My name is Jess, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye.